Hello everyone and welcome to this short video. So this one is going to be focused on CSS Grids because it seems like CSS Grids have that bad reputation of being complex, where they are actually super simple and super visual. So I'm just going to do a small demonstration, so hopefully you'll see how easy they can be and you could start using them. Alright. So I have here a small page, a very simple page, a header, an aside, a main, and a footer. And that's pretty much it. We have an article within our main section, and we are going to style it and use CSS Grid to just like put everything where we want it to be. All right. So I also have a very default SCSS file, so just making sure window body can take the whole height of the window, so we can push the footer on the bottom. Just making sure we don't have any margins on heading ones and on paragraphs. And I also targeted the container of my React app, so I'm using Next, as you can see. Just to make sure, give it like a small background color so we can see where elements goes and grid gaps and everything. It's going to be a little bit easier to see boxes. Making sure it's there, and here every element, so my header, main, footer and aside, they got a small padding and they have a background color which is white, so we can see where the blocks goes and where it is. All right. So we can go and we can start. It's very simple. What you need to do is just say you want it to be displayed as a grid. And as soon as you do that, you'll see, so I'm using Firefox here, but you see in the inspector, I can toggle the overlay grid element. And by default, it's one line, one column, and every time you add a new element, you get one new line. But we are going to define our own grid templates and where things should go and stuff. So you can see here the first line, second line, third line, and last line. All right. We are going to define our template, and for that, we are going to say grid template. And this is pretty much the only properties you need in CSS Grid, except for alignment and justification. But grid template can do pretty much everything you need in 95% of the case. So especially if you're dealing with static layouts. So if you want to place your menu bar on the right side, if you want to put your footer on the bottom, you don't need anything else than grid template. So we are going to start doing the mobile first, so we can see how media queries can change the grid template and how it would affect everything. All right. So doing for the mobile first, we want the header, and we'll just do one column because we want everything to be in one column, but placed just as we want. So we define here and say it get an height which is automatic. We want below this, we want the main with an automatic height as well. We want the aside to be behind it, and here we want anything automatic, and we would want the footer to be here automatic, and we are going to say this one takes one fraction of the remaining space. So this is going to be a padding kind of, so we can push the footer on the bottom of the page and everything would be nice. All right. So if I just save this, it wouldn't work much because we also need to define the column width. So to do that, you just do slash and then you define the column width. So in my case, it's going to be 100%. And there we go, we pretty much have our template. So as you can see, it didn't change anything. And the reason for that is we didn't define what those areas were. So we are going to be doing just that. Remember, I'm using SCSS, so I can nest things, elements within the SCSS file. If you were doing it in CSS, you would need to make sure you apply all the CSS rules. But pretty much it's just an easy way and less confusing way of explaining it. All right, so we want our header to get the grid area of header. We want our main to get the grid area of main. We want our aside to get the grid area of aside. And finally, we want our footer to get the grid area of footer. All right. So now that we have defined all of our elements, you can see there is one modification and something that changed. First of all, the footer dropped to the bottom, because as you can see in our template, it actually is at the bottom. This element here is never defined anywhere, so you can use one dot, you can use as many dots as you want. It's a specific notation, so you can say basically it's going to be nothing. But if you were to use nothing, we'll just do pretty much the same thing. It's just visually dots means this is an empty space. All right. So we got our grid. Now what can we do with something like this? We can add grid gaps. So basically, if I just go here and say I want half a rem in between each of my lines, but also in between my columns, you can see here you get like a gap that popped in between each element. And I don't know if you can see it very well on the inspect, but here we have our empty space and the gaps in between. All right. So it's very convenient, and we'll see a little bit more how you can use them when we are going to the large screen version of that layout. And that's pretty much my cue to go straight to it. So let's say you have a large screen. So it's going to be minimum width, let's say 700 pixels. We'll see how much we need because I'm zoomed in, and the zoom is going to be my if my screen is large or not. We are going to change our grid template. So in our case, if the screen gets larger, we can add a new column to make sure our content flows nicely. So we can go here and say the aside is going to be actually aside. We can say we still want a small space, and here we want our footer. All right, but I will also need to define my column width now, which is going to be 1 and 2. So you can see here that my header spans the 2 columns on the first line. Then you get my main article, main where there is the article, on the left column, then the aside on the right column, and of course the footer on the bottom. And you can see here how visual it can get. Something you can do is, if you don't want to, for instance, get this aside to take this much space, but just like take its own space, there are two things you can do. First, you can add a new line and just say, I assume that my aside is going to be shorter than my main. And there it goes, we just added a new line and said that the main can span multiple lines within that same column. So it works well. And then if you add things into the aside, it will just like grow until it actually push the main. If the aside is longer, will actually push the main thing. So you can do that, but you can also just define and say, just like you would do in flexboxes, you can say, okay, my aside may be shorter. So we are going to go here and say this one can align self, and this would be start if I am not mistaken. So here you go, you see that that line is still the same height as the main here, but you specify that your element should only take its own space or any space that you define. So if I go here and say it's 100 pixel, so any space it should take and align itself to the top. So there you go, start. If you put end, of course, goes to the bottom, and you can place your element there. The default value here is stretch, and which is basically stretch everything. But here it wouldn't work because I defined a specific height. All right, so you can see here it can be very powerful very quickly, because in just changing one property, you can pretty much change the whole layout of your application. So it's very convenient, especially if you're dealing with a lot of media queries, if you want to do animations. It's very, very effective. One of the things that's very cool, because this is, you can do something like this with flexboxes, even though you would need to add containers. So for instance, you could do this one as a flex of 0, 0, 100%, then a flex wrap. Make sure your flex wrap to the main, then the aside. Then you would need to add an empty element that's kind of a padding, or you need to do like space in between and put all of the top in one container. So flexboxes gives you the choice of putting everything in a more semantic way in your HTML. You just say, okay, I got my header, I got my main, I got my footer, and then deal with the design a little bit later. So if in, I don't know, in 1 year, I just want to change my mind and I'm like, yes, maybe the aside itself should go on top and push the header a little bit. There's nothing preventing me to actually changing all of my design without having to change my markup. So it's something that you may have to do if you use flexboxes, because you have to use containers and stuff. And this is very effective, and we're going to do another example. So if you understand how it works, you can leave this video and you know how to use CSS Grids. But I'm going to show you one of the other big advantage of grids over the flexboxes is the ability to lay out your things without containers. So I'll talk a little bit about this, but we are going to see a little bit more when we go to the main section. All right. So we are absolutely not doing the header article. All right. We are going to do a specific layout for this article. So we want to display it as a grid, and we are going to use grid template just the way we did. So we want, for instance, in our mobile view, we want to display it as title with an automatic height. We want then to display the image, then maybe description, automatic height. Then we would want share at the bottom, automatic height as well. And this is going to be 1, 2. All right, so if I go here to my main article, what's going on? Why is it not working? Main article, no style. Oh yes, sure. SCSS things, you absolutely need your semicolon if you are adding new things. And you see here that we didn't really quite get what we hoped to get, and I'm going to show you just why. All right, so here I focused on the article element, and we see that we have 2 lines, 2 column things, just the way we did it this way. And the reason we have this is we have 4 elements. We defined 6 cells, but yet again, we didn't specify which element went to where. So by default, if there's nothing defined, nothing taking that space, Grid will take the first element and put it in the first cell, take the second one, put it in the second cell, and so on and so on and so on. You can define that behavior by specifying if you want the new elements to get populated by columns or by line. But in 95% of the case, you know what you're getting, so we are just going to define everything here. All right. So anyone is going to get title. And if I save this, we'll see here the article 1 is now taking the first line as we specified. Then the next element gets pushed here. So in our case, it works just the same, except our social share is actually just 1 cell, and not like the whole line. So we are going to define everything to make sure everything is on place. Merge. We are going to say that our paragraph is desk, and we are going to say that our div is share. All right, I'm pretty sure it's a div. I'm just gonna dummy check myself. Yes, all right. So everything is good. We get our own beautiful display template. I'm going to just say this one is only gonna take 100% of its space, so it actually respects the column size that I set. So 1 fraction, 2 fractions, so 1/3, 2/3. And yeah, so that's good. Now let's say you want to go to a larger screen. So I'm just gonna zoom out a little bit, and you're just like, I have way more space, an horizontal space. So I would want to just put the title on the side of the image and the description underneath the title, but still on the side. You would just do the same thing and go here, min width, I think we used 700 pixel, and here we go, grid template. So we have the same template. Right, there we go. Except we can just define everything that we want. We don't have to change anything in the HTML itself. So we are going to just say image, and there you go. You get your nice looking element the way you want, and you don't have to change anything. You don't have to wait and add containers, do specific logic of flex order or anything, and you're all set. So it's super visual. You can see where everything should go, and super easy. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!